You're watching the Debka Files, exclusive news, insight and political analysis from the Middle East and around the world. Coming up on the show this week. Egypt suffers the most deadly massacre in its modern history, with over 300 people killed in an attack on a mosque. Is Egypt's security approach in the Sinai failing? The first message from Israel to Syria via Moscow, threatening to attack Syrian regime targets if Iran is allowed to set up bases there. And Debka Files reveals the Saudi kingdom's plan to set up a de-escalation zone in southern Syria, a stretch of 40 kilometers from the borders of Israel and Jordan. Now to our top story, and an unprecedented attack on a mosque in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula has killed more than 305 people, including 30 children, seen as the worst terror act in Egypt's modern history. The attackers stormed into the roundup mosque on Friday in the tiny northern Sinai town of Bir al-Abed during prayer time, riding under ISIS flags, so say sources here at Debka Files. Some witnesses say armed gunmen stormed the mosque and detonated explosives, while others say the attackers burst inside and shut all the exits except one. Men, women and children attempting to flee through the single door were then pointed at by a gunman outside to run in one direction, where armed men were waiting to mow them down with machine guns mounted on vehicles. The imam conducting those Friday prayers at the time of the shootout says the terrorists then entered the mosque and finished off any survivors.
حصل ان انا طلعت المنبر بعد دقيقتين بالظبط لما طلعت المنبر سمعت صوت زي ما يكون انفجار برا المسجد، وبعد كده ناس دخلت المسجد فضلت تضرب على كل المصلين اللي في المسجد. ما شفتش والله، انا شفت الانفجار برا بس. طبعا الناس اول ما سمعت صوت الضرب كله ابتدى يهرب، والناس طلعت على المنبر، لقيت الناس متكدسه فوق بعضها كده وفضلوا يضربوا في كل اي حد بيتنفس بيضربوا عليه. ما شفتش عددهم، ما شفتش شكلهم، حاسس بحركتهم في المسجد بس.
Now, on the same day last year, North Sinai's branch of ISIS, Ansar Bet al-Maqdis, kidnapped Sinai's oldest Sufi sheikh, Suleiman al-Haraz, and executed him, accusing him of practicing witchcraft. Local sources reporting the small town of Bir al-Abed was repeatedly threatened by the ISIS branch, calling on the town to abandon its Sufi practices. Now, in response to the massacre, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi pledging nothing less than brute force against the extremists.
على هذا الحادث الأليم الغادر الخسيس الجبان اللي كان بيهدف انه يحطم معنوياتنا، بيهدف الى تدمير صلابتنا، بيهدف الى التشكيك في قدرتنا. هذا الحادث، هذا العمل الارهابي الآثم يزيدنا صلابة ويزيدنا قوة ويزيدنا إرادة في ان احنا نقف ونتصدى ونكافح ونحارب الإرهاب.
Part of that stand, the Egyptian army carried out raids on what they said were terrorist command centers in the Rafah region and airstrikes in central Sinai against the vehicles which mounted that deadly attack. The army claims that at least 40 terrorists were killed. But 3 years into Egypt's military campaign against ISIS, is their effort enough to tackle the crisis? Or does there need to be a new approach? To discuss, let's bring in ex-Mossad chief and former member of Israeli parliament, Danny Yatom. Welcome, Mr. Yatom.
Thank you very much.
Egypt's President al-Sisi vowing a robust response to this, I quote, brute force. Is that the right response, particularly in the long term?
Well, you know, I'm not in a position to advise the Egyptians, but according to my own experience fighting terrorism for decades, I know that in order to fight terror groups efficiently, firstly, you need to have a very accurate intelligence in order to find out the whereabouts of the terrorists. In addition to it, there should be an operational force which is ready on a constant basis to immediately react upon this intelligence.
But does that kind of crackdown, does brute force work, or does it risk perhaps fueling extremism even further? Maybe there needs to be a new approach for dealing with terror in the Sinai.
No, brute force depends what the brute force is going to do. If it is to keep part of the area and to go step by step and in accurate way, pinpointed way to knock down the terrorists, that's okay. But if the brute force is for destroying villages and many innocent people, this will act against the Egyptian forces as a boomerang. Therefore, there should be a combination. On one hand, to deploy more forces and to take step-by-step approach to take parts of the Sinai Desert, to control them, and to try and to capture as many terrorists as possible. But it is essential that the Egyptians will adapt the method that we are acting against terror, meaningly pinpointed attacks.
You mentioned there innocent people in the Sinai Peninsula. 750,000 Bedouin live there in the Sinai. How does the government crackdown affect them?
Well, they are divided into tribes, and the government should do its utmost in order to avoid harming innocent people. There are some tribes which are anti-government, and they assist the terrorists. And there are some other tribes which are pro-government, and they assist the government. So I think that in addition to what we have said till now, there is another approach that should be used, and this is the government to put efforts in order to mobilize those tribes which now support the terrorists and to bring them to support the government.
Let's look at this specific village where the attack took place, Rauda. It's a stronghold of Sufis in Sinai. Why have this group, most people pointing fingers here at ISIS in the Sinai, why have they gone after Sufi Muslims?
They are not going only after Sufi Muslims. They are going after those whom they think are infidels, even if they are Islamists. And they see the Sufis as infidels. They see many other Sunnis as infidels. They see the Shiites as infidels. So according to their ideology, the ideology of the extremist Islamic groups from the school of the Muslim Brotherhood, is that if a Muslim does not behave accordingly to the Quran and to the Sharia, is an infidel and he should be killed. Now, they do not agree to the habits of the Sufis. They do not agree to the way the Sufis understand the Quran and the Sharia, and therefore the Sufis are inter alia also targets.
Lastly, I want to ask you, as a former Mossad chief, how has Israel, and perhaps how will Israel, assist Egypt in the wake of this attack to prevent such intelligence failings once again?
Well, I think that it is an Israeli interest to see the Egyptian armed forces and the Egyptian administration take control in the Sinai, because those terrorists which today operate against Egyptian targets might operate tomorrow against Israeli targets, and in addition to it, it might influence, let's say, extremist cells which are in the Gaza Strip and Israel itself. Therefore, for us, it is very important that the Egyptians will succeed. And there are many, many ways of assisting them, but I think that it will be not wise to speak about it openly.
Not wise. Okay, ex-Mossad chief and former member of Israeli parliament, Danny Atom, thanks for your insight on this as we move along.
You're welcome.
2 days after hosting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in Moscow, Russian President Putin says he has won the backing of Turkey and Iran to host a Syrian peace congress in what he termed a new stage in the Syria crisis. Here's that.
Уверенностью констатировать, что мы подошли к новому этапу, открывающему возможность приступить к реальному политическому процессу урегулирования. Считаю, что наши усилия должны быть сосредоточены на обеспечении долгосрочной нормализации в Сирии, прежде всего, имея в виду процесс политического урегулирования с финализацией этих переговоров в рамках Женевского процесса и на содействие обустройству страны в постконфликтный период.
Debka File's analysts pointing out two major hurdles in Russia's quest for a quick breakthrough to a political solution of the nearly 7-year-old civil war. First, the fate of Syria's 2.5 million Kurds and their YPG militia. Russia brought Kurdish political and military leaders together with al-Assad regime officials to negotiate a measure of autonomy for their 3 cantons in northern Syria, that's Hasakeh, Kobane and Afrin. At the Sochi summit, our sources report, Putin and Erdogan agreed to offer the Kurds special status for their provinces that are under Russian protection, hoping to bring the Kurds into the Russian fold. The second challenge to Russia on negotiating peace in Syria, the northern province of Idlib. It's the only part of Syria still dominated by rebel forces, namely Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that's the former al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front. Putin looking to disarm these rebels through negotiation, and failing this by siege and blockade, calling on the Syrian People's Congress to a meeting in Sochi on December 2nd to discuss a new Syrian constitution. This will take place after a new round of UN-backed peace talks in Geneva due to resume this week. Take a listen to the agenda set out by the deputy of the UN Special Envoy to Syria.
العملية السياسية عملية صعبة ومعقدة لأنه الوضع في سوريا معقد وبنبني استراتيجيتنا على خطوة ثم خطوة ثم خطوة وأرجو أن الاجتماع القادم أو الجولة القادمة بمشاركة فعالة من الحكومة مع وجود وفد واحد من المعارضة تساهم في دفع العملية إلى الأمام.
Staying with Syria, and Israel's Security Cabinet held a special session over the situation on its northern borders. Debka File's military sources saying Hezbollah, the Lebanese Shiite militia group, has begun massing forces in southern Syria. This after the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, warned the Syrian president that Israel will strike regime and allied military targets if Iran is allowed to set up bases in the country. Netanyahu reportedly notifying Assad via Russian envoys. This according to senior officials in Jerusalem. Now, this marks the first time Israel has ever sent an ultimatum to the Assad regime, warning Israel will strike the Syrian army and other targets allied to Damascus. Debka File's military sources adding that this is a preemptive step after learning Tehran is pressing Damascus to allow it to use Syria's largest air force facility, the T4 Tias military airbase. That's located between Homs and Palmyra. Let's bring in a senior former commander of the Israeli Air Force, Kobi Regev, with us in studio now. Kobi, we just heard that Netanyahu sent a direct warning to Damascus for the first time. What weight does this message carry, and I guess what kind of response can we expect from this?
Well, Netanyahu understands completely that Israel cannot accept any presence of Iran in Syria, especially not a physical one. Netanyahu knows for many, many years the Iranian dealing with them in many, many aspects. And he knows that the real intention of the Iranian right now in Syria is not helping Assad deal with his inner issues, but mainly to confront Israel and maybe to hit it, the border between Israel and Syria, which was quite calm for the last 10, 20 years.
But Israel is looking to defend this territory that it captured in 1967. But could these threats, or even threats with action, escalate, in fact, ending up sparking a major regional conflict?
I think it's possible. Let me give you an example. For the last 2 months, the Syrian regime has fired more than 3 SA-5 missiles, ground-to-air missiles, against the F-16 fighter jets in Lebanon, doing surveillance missions. We know that the Iranian was behind it, and they was urging the Syrians to shoot those aircraft. to set a new kind of rules of where we are allowed and not allowed to fly in Lebanon. And this action forced Israel to retaliate. So we attacked several of SA-5 batteries. So this kind of influence can really hit it and make problems in the Middle East.
You're a former commander of the IAF. How crucial is it that Tehran not get use of that T4 TS airbase we mentioned earlier? That's the biggest in Syria. How far do you think Israel will go to prevent that happening?
First of all, we need to understand that there's a difference between a theoretical presence via diplomatic and influence and a physical presence in Syria. The physical presence in Syria is quite dangerous to Israel. First of all, it increases the influence in Iran all around the Middle East. The second thing, it can enable the Iranian to project power toward Israel by, let's say, if they want to transfer some kind of a message or a threat to Israel, they can take one of their aircraft, just do a flyby near our borders. This is something the Israeli cannot accept and will not accept.
Kobi, is that why Israel has just upped their military budget? They added $1.4 billion. That's in addition to the Israeli army's annual budget. Is the focus here all on Iran and Syria, and what will that money be used for?
Well, the defense establishment of Israel is very organized and is doing a long-term planning, which include thinking of what will be the challenges using intelligence, and then how to set up the capabilities to tackle those challenges. Once you have a new element, a big change in the arena, then you need to do some adjustment to this program. The involvement in Iran now in Syria is a serious thing. So the defense establishment take it very seriously. She understands in order to tackle it and to be ready, she needs to have new capabilities. And this is why I believe our Minister of Defense has asked some more budget.
All right, Kobi Regev, former senior commander of the Israeli Air Force, thank you for your insight.
Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, the Saudi Crown Prince has announced a plan for a Saudi-led de-escalation zone in southern Syria. It will rival the two other zones established by Russia and the United States. The announcement comes after Riyadh withdrew its support from the Syrian rebel movement earlier this year. But by early September, the prince had already secretly ordered Saudi intelligence agencies to re-establish ties with 50 or so rebel militia of the so-called Southern Front in Syria. Our sources report in the early stages, Saudi officials made back-channel contact with Jordan's King Abdullah, as well as with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to notify them of the prince's plan to set up that southern Syrian de-escalation zone. Now, the zone is designed to stretch 40 kilometers from the borders of Jordan and Israel, starting from the northern edge of the Syrian Golan opposite the Israeli-held Mount Hermon slopes, and ending in southeastern Syria in the Suwaida district of Jabal Druze. Jordan and Israel reassured by Riyadh that the zone would be manned by a military force sent to tackle the Khalid ibn al-Walid militia, which is now allied to the Islamic State after wedging itself into the Syrian-Jordanian-Israeli border triangle. Staying with Saudi influence, and Debka Files can shed new light on the mysterious case of Saad Hariri, who resigned as Prime Minister of Lebanon rather abruptly while in Saudi Arabia at the beginning of the month, before travelling to Paris. He's now back in Beirut after agreeing to suspend his resignation as Lebanon's Prime Minister following a meeting with the country's president.
الحل اللي مرقت يمكن كان مثل صحوة لنا جميعا أنه ننظر لمصلحة لبنان قبل ما نكون عم نطلع على المشاكل اللي حوالينا. المشاكل اللي حوالينا مهمة ولكن لبنان أهم.
Ahead of Hariri's return to Beirut, French President Emmanuel Macron was reportedly behind his trip to Paris, persuading the Saudi Crown Prince to let him travel under a few Saudi-imposed conditions. Now, these included signing over all the properties and companies he owns in the kingdom, as well as his financial assets in foreign banks, to the royal treasury. Also on the cards, helping to return Hariri to Beirut to form a new government. Macron, in the meantime, seeking assurances from Saudi, as well as from the US and Israel, that the current turmoil in Lebanon would not be exploited. Our sources reporting Macron was concerned that Israel would seize the opportunity to destroy Hezbollah's rocket arsenals and military bases. Meantime, Hariri did return to Beirut, guarded by French secret agents. But with lengthy political negotiations ahead of forming a new government, France has time to bargain on the terms of Hariri's reinstatement as Prime Minister. Now, on the backdrop of these Saudi-French efforts, and after the Arab League last week branded the Lebanese Hezbollah group a terrorist organization, the Lebanese Shiite militia responded to Hariri's return to Beirut, hailing it as a return to normality in Lebanon.
وترى في تعاون الأطراف المعنية من أجل معالجة ما تبقى من آثار للأزمة التي نشأت مؤشرات واعدة يبنى عليها للتوصل إلى إيجاد المخارج المناسبة. إن عودة دولة رئيس الحكومة إلى البلاد والتصريحات الإيجابية التي صدرت عنه والمسار الإيجابي الذي تسلكه المساعي والمشاورات تبشر بإمكانية عودة الأمور إلى طبيعتها.
That's it for this week's top stories. Now to a roundup of regional headlines you may have missed with the news in brief. The YPG releases new figures detailing previously unknown numbers of US and NATO troops in two of their northern Syrian enclaves, Hasakeh and Kobane. The YPG spokesperson reported a total of 2,000 US servicemen. That's 4 times the figure in official US publications, and 2,000 more from Germany, Britain and France, marking the first time German and French military forces were known to be present in Syria. Following the liberation of the Syrian city of Aleppo, forced conscription, overnight raids, extortion and blackmail, the Syrian regime reportedly given its security services, Ba'ath Party loyalists and armed militia a free hand against the citizens of Syria's largest and once most prosperous commercial centre, the citizens of Aleppo becoming a source of income for Assad's military security and intelligence services. Beijing is set to help in the reconstruction of war-ravaged Syria, as long as the country shows flexibility in the upcoming peace talks. This was the message Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave Bashar al-Assad's senior advisor when they met last week in Damascus. China hopes a peaceful Middle East will help end the involvement of ethnic Uyghurs, Muslims in the western Chinese region of Xinjiang, some of whose activists have fought with ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Palestinian politician Mohammed Dahlan has a new solution for Syria: to accept Bashar al-Assad in power until 2021. This according to Syrian opposition sources, revealing Dahlan is involved with a Russian and UAE push for a Syrian political deal, which will include forming a new Supreme Military Council to prepare for elections. And after posting a propaganda image of a beheaded Pope Francis on the Telegram secret messaging app, a call to assassinate the US president's youngest son, Barron Trump. The group posted the name of his school, along with a Google map pinpointing its location. Well, that's all for this week's edition of the Debka Files, but do join us again next week for the latest breaking news, regional insight and analysis. See you then. Bye-bye.